Thank you, everyone, for coming to listen about secure pork supply today. How many of you, a show of hands, have even heard anything remotely about the secure pork supply plan? Well, there's some. How many of you know a lot about the secure pork supply plan? Awesome, Patrick. Thank you. So as part of my presentation today, I was kind of considering that as I put this together, and I thought maybe we'd go a little bit about why the plan is needed so that you have an understanding of why we are working on the plan, although Patrick alluded a very good correlation on the secure egg and secure turkey as to why these plans, it's good to have them in place prior to the outbreak. What exactly is included in the plan, and then we'll spend a majority of our time talking about the implementation of the pilot on a production site. So first of all, why is the plan needed? For those that don't know, the World Organization for Animal Health, or the OIE, has 178 member countries. We're going to talk about FMD just for a moment. 96 of those countries are endemic or have it and have never been free of FMD, otherwise known as foot-and-mouth disease, of course. 66 countries are free of FMD. 11 of those countries are free of FMD with zones either with or without vaccination. And 5 were free, but recently, in the last couple of years, suffered a reemergence of foot-and-mouth disease virus. That tells us that it's out there. It's out there in the world. It's a real and persistent threat, and accidental or intentional introduction of foot-and-mouth disease is a real possibility. For those that don't know, the United States has actually had 9 outbreaks of foot-and-mouth disease. Granted, it's been a long time ago. In the 1800s, they were due to the importation of live animals, but since we now have a federal system of inspection and quarantine of imported livestock, no outbreaks have been attributed to the emission of live animals. Then there were several in the early 1900s. Interesting thing about these, I thought I'd share with you, is the 1914 outbreak actually was the most devastating of these outbreaks. It occurred in Michigan and actually made its way into the Chicago stockyards. 3,500 head were eradicated at $4.5 million. So you think of $4.5 million in 1914, the value of what that would be today. In 1924, one of those outbreaks actually included the slaughter of 22,000 deer. So, of course, at that point, it was also an issue of it getting into the wildlife. And the 1929, the second, or the only outbreak, I guess, in 1929, was in California, and hogs fed meat scraps that came off of a steamship that had stocked meat in Argentina. So it was a scrap of garbage feeding issue at that time. All of these outbreaks were controlled by stop movement and stamping out. So all of the infected animals were euthanized and disposed of. Well, considering the last break was was 85 years ago, the animal industry has changed slightly since then. It has increased in size, the herd size. I mean, we're looking now at 50,000 plus cattle feedlots, 5,000 cow dairies, 20,000 sow herds, and that's quite a bit different than what we were looking at the last time we had foot-and-mouth disease. So in addition to larger herd sizes, we also have animals that are a lot more mobile than they were in 1929. You hear reports of 1 million head of hogs on the road at any one day, 400,000 cattle in transit. That doesn't include all the animals down here showing at World Pork Expo in the barns today, too. And if you look at the exhibitor list, they're from all over the United States. Another interesting thing about our industry, of course, is that these are foreign animal diseases. So our animals have no immunity to these diseases whatsoever. So it's going to really hit them hard when we do get the disease. Of course, when we get hit with a foreign animal disease, the export markets will be lost and prices will drop drastically. Initially, animals will not be moved right as the outbreak is being assessed. We do have emergency stocks of FMD vaccine, but they're far below what would be required, say, if a state like Iowa was hit with FMD. We wouldn't have enough vaccine to come in right away to utilize to control the outbreak. And, this is such an efficient industry, the way we move animals around, that there would be unprecedented challenges that we would have to face in the event of an FAD outbreak. So that leads us into, hopefully I've convinced you somewhat that a plan is needed. There are plans currently with the USDA that take into effect infected herds and such, but the secure pork supply plan is a little bit different. It's there to develop procedures to allow the safe movement of animals with no evidence of infection in an FAD control zone to our pork processing plant or to other sites of production. So like Patrick said on the bird side, what happens is the infected sites are located, the control zones are set up, the control areas, and while they're dealing with the infected herds, these are for the animals in the zone that are showing no evidence of any infection. So rather than quarantining these herds that have no evidence of infection, but allowing them to continue to move animals so that they can stay in business. The plan that I'm going to talk about has been a few years in the making. There's been a lot of people involved in these plans. We've had federal and state officials, representatives from Pork Board, National Pork Producers Council, ASV, producers from different stages of the industry, different phases of the industry, different types of production. We've been working on it at Iowa State, also had University of Minnesota working on different parts of it, and it's been funded through the USDA APHIS and through the National Pork Board. Unique to what the secure egg and the secure turkey are, and there's also a secure milk in the works, they're all focused on one disease. We're working on tackling 4 different diseases on our plan: foot and mouth disease, classical swine fever, African swine fever, and swine vesicular disease. So the strategies to respond to and for the management, the response to and the management of an FAD outbreak will change as the outbreak progresses. So if it's a small focal outbreak, the response should be different than if it's a large outbreak that affects much of the United States. For that reason, there's been a document produced by Dr. Jim Roth with my group that's called the Classification, Phases, and Types of a Foot and Mouth Disease Outbreak and Response. Since then, there's also been documents for African swine fever and for classical swine fever. These documents take into account the scale of the outbreak. So if you look here, we have the size of the outbreak on the y-axis, and we have down below here the emphasis on stamping out. So while the plan used to be, and back as I talked about in the 1800s and early 1900s, of stamping out was how all the outbreaks were handled, the idea now is if we have a focal outbreak, which is maybe just a few herds in a small area, that those animals could actually be euthanized and disposed of, whereas in an effort to control the outbreak. Whereas if we get into a larger type 5, which is a large one in the United States, maybe even a type 4, type 6, to where we have so many herds infected in the United States that stamping out is not practical or would devastate the industry, then there are alternative plans that need to go into play. So those are all taken into account in this document that we work off of. So what's going to happen at the beginning of an outbreak? Excuse me. There be no new movements initiated from the control area. And so we like to kind of look at it a little bit like with 9/11 when they had all the planes in the air. You already have the planes in the air. They need to land somewhere. So we're going to already have all these pigs on the road. We find out we have an index case somewhere, and while we're trying to figure out exactly the extent of the outbreak, the pigs that are already on the road have to land somewhere. So whether it's a matter of they're from the control area and they go to their point of destination, they turn around and go back to their location, or whether they're euthanized en route, those are all decisions that need to be made. But those animals need to land somewhere. No new movements will be initiated. And then within a few days, while the extent of the outbreak is determined, then we need to have a plan to restart movement. And so the secure pork supply plan is looking at restarting movement from those herds that are not infected or showing no evidence of infection that are in that control area. So now I'm going to move a little bit into, or actually majority of our time now, into the implementation of the actual pilot project. So what we've worked on is the pilot project is mainly focused at the production site. We have other components in play. We're looking at the packer, transportation companies, and so on. But mainly I'm going to focus on the production site. And a lot of what our goal is, of course, is to keep the site that is negative, and to allow them to keep moving animals. We also don't want to inadvertently move animals that are infected. So there's a lot of factors that we need to look at. In our pilot project, we conducted it this winter and spring. We wanted to demonstrate 3 movements: a farrowing to nursery movement, a nursery to finisher movement, and a finisher to harvest facility. And for this pilot, we included all the players that we thought would be involved in an outbreak. So we had the employees, the owners, the site managers, the herd veterinarian. We had personnel at the packing plant. FSIS was involved. They knew what was going on. We had state and federal animal health officials. And IAD is the Institute for Infectious Animal Diseases at Texas A&M, and I'll get into a little more what they did, and then the National Pork Board. So all the players were involved in our pilot project. So this is just a schematic overview, and I'll keep referring to it quite a bit just to bring you back to kind of where we're at. I'll break it apart here. We're going to start first. The first step is you have to select the sites. I'll let you know our goal this time was to have all our movements occur within Iowa. That way we were only dealing with the state and federal animal health officials in one state. Now that we've completed this, our next goal is going to be an interstate movement, and we're looking at 2 to 3 to 4 states possibly. We have a couple different ideas. And then we'll pull in the opinions of several state and federal animal health officials. So this did just include all 3 movements were just within Iowa, and that was our goal this time. The veterinarian that helped us with our pilot is Paul Thomas at AMVC, at Audubon Manning Vet Clinic. So he oversaw the sites from which all the movement occurs. That was our continuity as we worked through it this time, because this was our first pilot project. So it was up to Paul to select, or Dr. Thomas, to select which sites would be good sites to participate, of which we could get owner, manager, employee buy-in, and we could implement the program on those sites. So what we had him do was enter the information into a spreadsheet. For privacy, I've blotted out a lot of the information for these producers. So we had him enter this stuff all the information into a spreadsheet, and then we had a data portal. Kevin Flaming up at Iowa State put together a data portal that we used. As he'd be the first to tell you that it's held together with baling twine and duct tape. It's something that worked really good for our pilot. It's not something that could be scaled up nationally. So the way we used it was to try to figure out how we wanted the data portal to function, and it served that purpose. We figured out everything we needed to have the data portal do so that when one is built on a larger basis, we can tell it all the qualities, those individuals that they need to build into the data portal. So we had them fill out a spreadsheet for now. The idea is to enter it into the data portal. So we needed to know the demographics of the sites. And then one of the first things he did was the biosecurity side. So we're going to talk more about biosecurity as a big component, of course. We want to make sure that we keep the site negative. Plus, we want to help assure the state and animal health officials that are signing off on these permitted movements that this site is doing everything to keep the disease out. On the biosecurity, there's a few different things that need to be done on site. One is to implement BPS, which are called Biosecurity Performance Standards. We have a list of those, and I'd be happy to show them to anybody when we're finished. There's quite a few to be breaking them down in front of you right now. But the idea is to implement these biosecurity performance standards on the site, to write a site-specific biosecurity plan. So what Dr. Thomas did was they wrote a site-specific plan for the 3 sites involved, and they highlighted in there how they're going to address all these and accomplish all the biosecurity performance standards. The standards are not something that dictate to you exactly how to do something. They give you the endpoint that needs to be accomplished, and you can figure out how to get there. So it may tell you that all employees and deliveries need to come through one entry point, and you can figure out where your entry point is and how that works. But that's just kind of an example. Employee training, one of the BPS is that all employees need to be trained in biosecurity. Well, as we started to do that, there's not really an easy system to that's universal to say, oh, yes, our employees are trained in biosecurity. We know there's a lot of training that goes on. It's just not something that you can verify that it occurred. So we needed to work on that side, and then we had a third-party verification that goes in and shows that the biosecurity performance standards were met on that site. And that helps give the state and animal health officials reassurance that, that they were all met. Just an example, we talked about that they have to write a biosecurity site-specific biosecurity plan. For some systems, it has to be on each site, but for some systems, they may look very similar, and that's perfectly acceptable. So, because the site layout may be very similar. So basically, we have the site-specific biosecurity plan, and he uploaded that to the data portal. We had, on the data portal, you can see we had different information that he could look at and an example of a plan. And then he uploaded the plan to the data portal. And in this case, that was something that the animal health officials could look at, and they could review his plan. When we finished with the whole pilot project, we got together with all the players at a meeting for a day, and we hashed out everything that we thought could be improved. And so one of the things we went through with the biosecurity performance standards, we talked to the veterinarian. The feedback on site was, could these be implemented? You know, were they too expensive? Were they practical? Could you do them? How would you change them? We talked to the state animal health officials. Do you accept these? Do you need more stringent ones than what we have listed? And so that was the discussion that went back and forth. We came to the conclusion, one thing that we hadn't talked about a lot were propane deliveries and the location of some of the propane tanks. That was something that needed to come up more. We have carcass handling in there, but the animal health officials asked us to have the site spell it out a little bit more defined. And additional options for securing the farm. We talked about what would happen if it were weather conditions and trying to put up gates and that sort of thing. So that was some of the feedback that we received on the standards. But overall, we were happy to hear that the veterinarian said that for the most part they could all be implemented on the site. And then back to the employee training. What we did was we developed an online training system that it can either, the way it was designed was that employees could go on their own and take these courses and these quizzes, or they could, the feedback was they could be done in a group setting, and I'll get into that too. For biosecurity, there's 4 different training modules. There's an introductory of biosecurity. There's one called Do Not Bring the Disease to the Site. There's one about perimeter buffer area and another one about the line of separation and defining how all those areas work. They're very short. They're all less than 5 minutes. There's a quiz afterwards, a 10-point quiz. Originally, we had that they needed to get 90% to pass the quiz on all 4 quizzes, and then they would get a certificate at the end. They can retake the quizzes as many times as they want to. The questions do mix up. We're adding additional questions too, and they mix up if they retake them, so they can't just memorize A, false, and so on. And with many of the questions that they're wrong, when they get done, they can look at it and see why they missed the question, because the whole idea is that they gain understanding. It's not that they pass a test. So when they're finished, they have the certificate. This shows, 1, accountability that they actually completed the course, and then 2, it fulfills that biosecurity performance standard that these can all be put in a file and maintained, that if incident command came and asked about it, that you could prove that the employees have all been trained in biosecurity. So the feedback that we got, an interesting thing Dr. Thomas did, of course, is that he does a lot of group meetings, and so he had a group training session, so he had all the managers of the different sites come in and had them all take it as a group test. Worked out really well. So we're kind of rewriting things on how that would work very easily. We talked about reducing the score down to 80%. Again, it wasn't that they get a really good test. We just wanted, or score, we just want them to understand the material. And he had a few suggestions on some of the most frequently missed questions. And then, one of our goals had been to translate everything to Spanish as we go along too, once we knew that we were headed in the right direction. The issue of the third-party verifier would go on site and go through the checklist and make sure that all the biosecurity performance standards are met. So we did this for the pilot. It was we need the date because we say that it's good for a year, the verification is. Pass, not pass, there's not a lot of cushion in between. Either you have them or you don't. And then they actually upload the evaluation sheet that the verifier fills out. So one thing that we found was that it brought to our attention that in some states they may be willing to have different verifiers than other states. Some states may require or want to hire 1 or 2 verifiers to go and do the whole state. Other states may want all the PQA advisors to be a verifier. So we're working through a computer system now that individuals could go on and look at the states that they would want to be a verifier in, and get the feedback from that state, and then take some training to where there'd be obviously it's just not it's basic information that they would need to understand to go on to be a verifier. So we're working through that process right now. So that was biosecurity. So now we're going to move on to surveillance. Of course, looking for the disease and testing for the disease on site is a pretty important thing when it comes to moving animals, because we're saying that we want animals to move that show no evidence of infection. So we need people going in, looking at the animals, and performing some surveillance, actual sample collection. So one component of it's called active observational surveillance is to have the people on site actually monitoring the animals. And the term for that is the herd health monitors. And so, these are the people that are in the barns looking at the animals every day. They're nobody's specifically designated. It's just that person. If I'm the one that's going into that finisher every day, I would want to be the herd health monitor trained to observe that site. You can have as many people trained on a site as you want. And then they're going to go in and they're going to record observations for 15 days prior to the movement request. So again, back to the training. This time they have 6 different lessons to complete. The introduction on overview of foreign animal diseases, and then recognizing the 4 diseases that are in the Secure Pork Supply Plan, and then what the daily observation worksheets look like and how to complete them. Again, there's only 4 quizzes because we combined some of the diseases together in the quizzes. And again, the whole issue of a 90% pass rate. Again, they're short. They're all 4 to 6 minutes in length. It's a narrated PowerPoint showing what the lesions look like so that the herd health monitors know what they're looking for. We also have a lot of additional resources in this section that they can look at and click on to get more information on what the lesions or the disease is all about. This is just an example. If they click on some of the wall charts, this is the foot and mouth disease, the African swine fever, and the classical swine fever wall charts that we put together with the National Pork Board. And Patrick has those available at the pork store that you can go on there now and order. He has push packs with 6 different wall charts available. You can order them at no charge and have them sent. I think Patrick's goal is to have one in every barn. So this helps with the employees looking for the diseases that we're very concerned with for the plan. Just kind of a look, it shows you can go in. This is a program that they use a lot for training veterinary students online. So the whole training aspect of biosecurity and herd health monitoring can be ramped up to a national level. So once we get those in place, that's something that is ready to roll. And again, you get the certificate. And again, we talked about that group training would be beneficial. The way Dr. Thomas, when he did the group training, is he handed out the quizzes. Of course, everybody took them. The great thing about group training then is he discussed with them the correct answers. At that point, when it's a group training and there's discussion going back and forth, the 80%, 90% really doesn't matter. And that's one thing that we're going to write into it. You're not going to say, hey, Patrick, you got a 70% stay after and keep taking the quiz till you get it right. The whole idea is that they learn what they missed and why they missed it. And so then the idea is in the group training that everybody that participated would get their certificate. So it's a great idea that Dr. Thomas had. We need to cross-reference those that took the HHM training with those that are completing the observations, because what we did in the pilot is we had an individual go in and enter those 15 days of observations. And so we need to make sure that the people that are making the observations are those that were trained to make the observations. And again, translating it to Spanish. So in our data portal, we had the form online, so they would take it into the barn. This is what the form looked like. There's a lot of overlap with the type of information we're looking for and what is available on the PQA forms. And so we're working to figure out how we can integrate the two together. We don't need a whole bunch of clipboards out in the barn filling out all kinds of different forms when we can blend them into one form. It just has the grouper pen ID, the herd veterinarian, the date. We're looking specifically for the number dead and the number sick that were treated by injectable. And then we want them to look for these clinical signs. I mean, the people in the barns are looking for diseases. They're looking for sick pigs every day. I mean, that's what they do, right? We just want to make sure that they are attuned to looking for the diseases and the clinical signs associated with foot and mouth disease, classical swine fever, and African swine fever. So that's the goal. So for our pilot, we had these in the barns. They completed the number dead, number sick. Then they had somebody back in the office enter them into our data portal so that we would have them to be viewed. Everything that we have in the pilot, all the information we're gathering has to be able to be viewed by incident command. They have to be able to look at it if they want to decide if this, if there is enough of a demonstration that no evidence of infection is here, that these animals would be allowed to move. So again, the feedback was to integrate them with the PQA forms, and those are just a couple of the PQA forms that are used. And another interesting thing that we came across was we need to add a comment box. So, for example, when I was in practice, there was a situation where I had a group of animals that were electrocuted around the feeder. And so if that's 4 days before you want to move pigs, and all of a sudden you have a spike in number dead, and you have nowhere to be able to explain why so many animals died, you're going to be looked at as a possible source of infection of that disease, and they may not allow you to move pigs when it had nothing to do with FMD. It was unusual situations. So that's one thing that those are the types of things that we were looking to work through as we did the pilot. We'll move on now to there's an EPI questionnaire. So for each site, the idea is that you go in and you complete an EPI questionnaire. The whole purpose of the EPI questionnaire is so that incident command can evaluate the animal disease risk factors when the requests for movements are being considered. So if you're looking to move animals in 3 days, you need to have an EPI questionnaire completed, and it talks a lot about things coming off and on the site so that they can assess if there's a great disease risk with the animal movement or other factors, other sites around you, what your neighbors have for livestock, and so on. It's quite a document. It's several pages long. So this is something that Dr. Thomas did for us. He completed an EPI questionnaire for each site, and he uploaded it onto the data portal. One thing that we have been still having discussions on is once an EPI questionnaire is completed, how long is it good for? Because if you're bringing a lot of things off and on the site, your risk may change. Does it change in a month? Does it change in 3 months? Does it change in 6 months? Does it change with every load that you want to send out? So we're still trying to figure out how long an EPI questionnaire that's completed is good. So now what's happened is we've gathered all this. Dr. Thomas implemented all the biosecurity performance standards, did the employee training. He completed the questionnaires for each site. He's figured out, of course, which animals are going to be moving. He's trained his herd health monitors. He's got them doing the documentation in the barn. We have them documenting deads and treated by injections for 15 days prior to movement. So he may have been observing it longer than that, but we only have him enter the last 15 days. So they're entering the 15 days. Someone in the office is entering it into the computer system. Now he's getting to where he wants to move animals. So he completed a movement permit request. So that's kind of what's happening in the avian influenza world, is when they want to move, they have to request a permit to be able to move animals. So he says, okay, we're ready, we want to move. For us, the way we did it in the pilot, he put it in the day before that he wanted to move animals the next day. So this is what our movement permit requests look like. It just had the where the animals were originating from, where they were going to. One interesting thing that I want to mention is, of course, surveillance samples are very important. And in the Secure Pork Supply Plan, we have written down that PCR tests would be performed, and we talk about oral fluids and we talk about nasal swabs. For our pilot, we went with that it was a control area for classical swine fever. So if we're collecting samples and we're submitting them to the lab, which Dr. Thomas was very willing to do, but the problem is, one, then the lab would test for classical swine fever. And what happens if he gets a false positive? And, that's a very real thing. All of a sudden now they have to do a foreign animal disease investigation and quarantine his site, all for the purpose of our pilot. So that was not something that we were going to ask of him. We had talked to the NOM lab about maybe making a special circumstances if something like that would happen. And at the time, they were very busy with PED, and so it wasn't something that they wanted to deal with. So we weren't going to put these sites through that. So we did not actually collect the samples and submit them, although that is a very important part of the secure pork supply plan. So then, once he submitted his movement request the day before, Incident Command got to look at all the information and decide if they were going to allow the movement permit, or allow the movement to occur by citing the permit. So this is Dr. Jeff Kaizen, the Assistant State Veterinarian. He signed off on one of the permits. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about, I mentioned IAD earlier, the Institute for Infectious Animal Diseases at Texas A&M. And they have a system called Ag Connect that is used to help bring all this data together. So they took some of the information. Those just demonstrate movements right there. But this was down in the bottom left here. You see where it says Secure Pork Supply. I'm going to hone in on just that section for a minute. So if you look here, and again, I whited out all of the identification. But the premises information, the status, if all the information is uploaded, the L2 plan, that's the biosecurity plan, if the site's been verified, if the epidemiology questionnaire is on, and if all the active observational surveillance data is submitted. So I know one of the goals is to have a red light, green light, because as all these requests come into Incident Command, there's going to be a boatload of them. And it's an issue of if they have time to look through all of this information, or if they want to accept that it's there, or maybe they've looked it over for the site last week and now that site requests another movement and they want to already give it a green light to go. So what we did a red light, green light concept was Incident Command could look, and if Dr. Thomas had put in a request for movement and they looked and saw a red light, they didn't even have to look over the information because it wasn't all there. And in this case, the AOS information had not been uploaded yet. But the idea, if they looked at it and saw that this was all green, then they automatically knew it was all there and they could go in and look at it. And it's up to Incident Command to look at what information that they want to look at. If they want to review the biosecurity plan, they can. If they want to look over all the active observational surveillance information, if they want to read through the EPI questionnaire, that they can do any of that. So all the information is there for them to look at. The cool thing with Ag Connect is for the movement information, they connected to a company that held the data for AMVC. And so they could make those data, the connections, they could connect to our data portal, that Ag Connect could connect to all these places, but keep it turned off. So Incident Command couldn't see it until we told them we needed them to see it. And then as they describe it, they just turn the key, and all this information comes into this one location for an Incident Command to look at. So they could look at, again, all the AOS observations that were uploaded. They can look at movements that came out of that finisher prior. You can actually put your cursor over the location and look at movements that have come in and out of there. So with everything that we did, we had evaluations completed. Again, we had our meeting, so we got all this feedback. What we're doing now is we're working on taking all of those suggestions and making those changes to the pilot. And we're already in talks of expanding the pilot to 2 to 3 states. The interesting thing about that will be to get the opinion of the animal health officials in those states, because we've only had the opinion in one state, to make sure that they are okay with a lot of the parameters that we have there. I mean, the secure pork supply plan, it's so important to have an agreement prior to the outbreak so that everything can just flow when the outbreak occurs. I know that that's a strong generality, and really great thing to happen, but it's very important that we work through all these bugs beforehand so that it's functional when we need it. Some of these items too can be, the way we're working it out, it can be implemented prior to the outbreak. So our hope is that when we get the biosecurity stuff, we get the AOS stuff all worked out, it's something that could be implemented prior to the outbreak, so that when the outbreak occurs, that these sites have already been verified and that there's not a long line of sites that need to be verified as the outbreak is playing out. We do have some of the information on the Secure Pork website. A lot of the pilot stuff is not there because it's still drafts as we're changing things, but that would give you an idea of the plan. And there's other information. This is all on that site too. So I know that was kind of a fast rundown. There's a lot of things that I left out. I do have the specifics with me if there's anything that anybody would like to know more about. But this was kind of meant to be an overview that there has been a pilot, that we're still moving forward with this, that we're still making changes as we see fit and as things come to light during the pilot. And as Patrick said, with the avian influenza that's been playing out, it reminds us more than ever that these plans are very important to the industry. But I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Dr. Zaabel?
So if we have an event today, what will be a logic expectation for how long will it take to get the plan ready so they can move pigs out of that site?
There's certain components right now that we could put into play. We could go with the biosecurity performance standards that we have right now off the first pilot. The training could all be ramped up, but in terms of the others information, it's something that we have a lot of plans in play that we're hoping to have a lot of it ready to roll by the end of the year, or have made significant progress based on these pilots by then. So just hold off the outbreak another 8, 10, it's been 85 years. Can we hold off for another couple years maybe?
Another question I saw in the back.
Yes, when something does happen, and so there's a lot of other things moving, how does this rank in terms of, taking care of the actual issue versus public relations? How does this get prioritized?
And a lot of the public relations side is being addressed through another group, the FMD Info. Is that the?
There's a cross-species crisis communications group that started with foot and mouth disease, and they would be the PR arm for the industry, the food is safe message that people would hear, and then the communications related to the response.
But you're right, and that's another one. Another project that we're starting to work on is, what about those sites that were infected and are now going negative, either through vaccine usage or they're cleaning it up, and at what point would they be allowed to move animals? So that's another component that we need to start working on too. But you make a very good point, and the idea is that we need to make this as clear and as simple as possible for incident command, so it doesn't become an issue that they are too busy dealing with the infected sites and aren't even willing to look at the sites that don't have any sign of infection and allowing them to keep moving. So that's, again, the red light, green light, trying to make it very simple so that they will allow those animals to move.